Welcome, everybody. Common Sense Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2. We got you guys a great show lined up today with some very special guests. We got Mr. Randy Blank here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Garrett.
And we got Jason Geils over here from Rosewood.
Thanks, sir.
What's going on, fellas?
Living the dream right now.
Yeah, let's talk.
Let's rock and roll.
Yeah.
They want to get right into it. They said don't even waste any time. They're ready to rock. Well, Randy, let's kind of dig in and start off with you. Let's tell everybody a little bit about your background, what you started out doing, and where you got into where you're from, what you used to do, what you do. I know you're retired now, but give everybody a little bit of background about yourself here.
Okay, I'm a chemical engineer. Went to Texas A&M. After I graduated, I kind of fell in love with wine. So wine was my first drink that I really enjoyed. But I always had a bottle of bourbon at the house. Maker's Mark, Weller Centennial, those were the two that I always had, but I wouldn't call myself an enthusiast back in the 80s or 90s. That was one of my drinks.
Just your standard pour.
Yeah, just standard pour. Well, I had Maker's Mark because I think my dad's best friend said this is the best bourbon out there. So that was all the research I had done, but I enjoyed it. What got me going down the rabbit hole was in the late 90s, I went into my local liquor store to get another bottle of Weller Centennial, and the manager comes over and says, I heard they've stopped making that I can't get anymore. And I said, well, that's interesting. Well, I really like that, so I went and bought another bottle off the shelf, and I asked him, I said, is there something similar to that? And he says, well, we've got this old Rip Van Winkle 10107, 10-year-old, higher proof, wheated whiskey. You might give that a try. And I said, is that the one with that bottle that looks like it's got a homemade label on it? It's just ugly as hell. He says, yeah, that's the one. So I bought it and took it home and enjoyed it. But when he told me that the Weller Centennial was going to be discontinued, I thought, well, how can I verify that? What's out there? What resource? So I get on the internet and don't find anything. But I find a forum, a bulletin board, so to speak, called straightbourbon.com. And once I got involved with straightbourbon.com and started doing research and got to know some of the people that were other enthusiasts and people in the bourbon industry, I fell in love with it and started making trips to Kentucky.
What was that first trip like? Like where did you decide to go? You obviously went to Buffalo Trace first, I'm assuming, or...
Actually, it was around the Bourbon Festival. The Bourbon Festival has two events, one in the spring and one in the fall. So I was going there really not to go see a distillery, which I would want to go do, but really to meet and hang out with these people and drink bourbon together.
I imagine that's a lot different than what it is. Like I did that with my older brother about 3 years ago and went to the one in the fall. And I've heard it's evolved and it's changed. And I heard even recently it's evolved more. So
right.
What was the Bourbon Festival like back then? I'm just curious because I know what it was like 3 years ago, and that was my first trip to really going to the distilleries, going to Bourbon Fest, and
right.
going down that road.
It was more like a county fair that people drank a lot of bourbon.
So not that different.
And not that different.
Pretty
It was
much the
a
same.
county fair with the Kentucky Headhunters being the big name act on Saturday night or whatever. But the straight bourbon people that would get together for our bottle shares, there's a hotel there called the General Nelson. And that's where we would all stay. It was a Best Western. And there's a gazebo in the back. And that was the de facto hangout spot for people to bring their bottles of bourbon and share. And back in that 03, 04, 05 time frame, a lot of the master distillers would come and hang out with us because they, as we were talking earlier, they weren't rock stars back then. And so we were their fans, and they would come and they would bring bottles. Jimmy Russell, Julian Van Winkle, Lincoln Henderson, all of them would come and say hi. Parker Beam, they'd all come by and say hi.
You're making bourbon heads in all of our groups spin right now because you're like, oh, we just had this nonchalant hangout before and after the festival, and all these master distillers just came by, brought some stuff, and hung out with us.
Well, they were still having to work hard to sell bourbon back then.
Yeah.
And so we were obviously some good customers of theirs, and so they would come and hang out with us. now as we know, the bourbon, if it's good, flies off the shelf, if it ever hits the shelf.
I don't think it hits the shelf.
Yeah, and they wouldn't be able to do that today in the world that we have now. They wouldn't last 10 minutes probably out there. I mean, whereas you guys probably had a much more, which had to be amazing to have a small, intimate group like that and to just sit around and hear those stories and stuff. What were some of the like better stories that you remember from those times of just sitting around with some of those guys that?
Well, I'll probably have to relate it to some of the things that I did when I was there.
Okay.
So I'm up there on my first trip, and I've met Julian Van Winkle, and I confirmed that Weller Centennial's not going to get made anymore, but I like Julian's products, and so I'm talking to him, and he says, and this is where I learned, well, this all comes from a distillery that's closed down, and I look at him and I go, yeah, it's from Stittsweller. That's right, it's closed. So I found another bourbon I like, and it's going to dry up someday because the distillery's closed. So, I'm going to have to find a new favorite. So I started chatting with him, and I said, well, Julian, what would you think about me buying a whole barrel from Stittsweller? And he says, well, I've done that before. I knew he had for retailers and bars and restaurants. But he'd never done it for an individual, but he liked the idea. And then that's what we talked over the summer of 2004. And the 10-year-old 107 was my favorite, but he had already moved the supply away from Stittsweller because of the age.
This is the best part of the story right here. Like, seriously.
So he says, you'll have to go to the 12-year-old. And I said, well, I've never tried your 12-year-old, so I bought a bottle and liked it. And I said, okay, I'll come to Kentucky and with you and with Julian, and I'd like to pick a barrel of what ended up being the Lot B, the Old Rip Van Winkle Lot B, and really enjoyed it. So I make the selection. I get my barrels. I get 17 cases of 12 bottles each. I think I've got a lifetime supply. I've got a lifetime supply of Lot B. I'll never have to be involved in another barrel pick, and it's from the Stittsweller Old Fitzgerald Distillery. Tastes really good, and I've got 3 bottles left.
And if you just set it aside, you probably could have retired 10 years earlier.
Yeah. But
that's amazing. So this is where, as you guys heard me allude to, where this Van Blankle came from. Who coined this Van Blankle?
On Straight Bourbon, we would have a chat Tuesday or Wednesday nights. Everybody would get on, and Ed, one of the members of Straight Bourbon back then, coined it that. He came up with the name, and it stuck. And so that was the Van Blankle.
And where'd they get the picture that I've seen on this bottle that like somebody like put on there, the little tater sticker? That must have been a classic Halloween or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure I can picture that, but.
With your name on it.
I saw one that was on his Facebook page, and it's like the 70s pimp suit. And it's like somebody did a little fun around there.
That was for a birthday, and a friend of ours makes cakes. That's actually a sugar bottle that she made the labels and everything, and it was making fun of that Van Blankle concept, but it's me dressed up for Halloween as a pimp. Yeah. But
I was going to say.
That's the bottle you've seen, but that's not how all the bottles came. That was just one for a cake decoration.
That would have been awesome. That would have been like the original tater of all taters.
That would have been something. No, my label wasn't anything special. I think it says single barrel, personally selected by Randy Blank. And so that was the summer of 2004. When I did that.
At least they spelled your name right.
Yeah, I got the name was right.
At least they spelled your name right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? So when you did that barrel pick, did they send you samples, or did you went with Julian and picked that barrel out?
I met Julian at the Buffalo Trace Distillery, and I invited a friend from Straight Bourbon who lived in Bardstown, who would travel over there with me so that she could take pictures. So it was Julian, myself, Brenda taking the pictures, and the warehouseman. We were there in the tasting area and went through the process. Obviously, that was my first time to be involved with the barrel pick, and it was a lot of fun. And that was about the time social media is getting active. So it's out there on the internet that here's an individual that bought a single barrel of bourbon, and right after that, people started saying, well, I'll form a group of buddies and we'll go do it. And in 2005, several groups got formed on the internet for that to happen. And then it's just taken off from there.
Yeah, I think you're kind of the king. Like, you started this whole single barrel thing.
I would agree.
I don't know about that. It had been going on for a long time, but just primarily through the retail channels.
Right.
I was an individual, and I did it right when social media was taking off. So
Yeah.
it got out there, and everybody else saw, and hey, if he can do it, well, let's do it. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. Let's go do it. And I've been involved with maybe a dozen picks since then, but that was my first and probably the most fun.
I mean, it sounds like you hit the home run grand slam right out the gate. You got Julian Van Winkle to let you come into the Golden Gates there and pick your own barrel. That's amazing.
He liked the idea. He thought it would be good for business, and he thought single barrel programs would grow. So he was pretty astute. At the time, he had recently partnered with Buffalo Trace, and they did not want to do that. They were trying to push the product through new retail outlets, and they didn't want to take a whole barrel out of production. And he somehow convinced them, and I tried to too. I would call them and talk to them. Take it out of the allocation to Texas. Find some way to let's make this happen, and we eventually did.
That's really cool. I mean, he seems like a really amazing guy. I mean, Pappyland is one of my favorite bourbon books, and when that came out, and I forget the name of the author, the guy from ESPN, I did one of his virtual book signings during COVID, and Julian was on there for probably an hour and a half, and that was just one of my all-time favorite kind of podcast type things to watch. I mean, he just seems like such a great guy with so many stories and his passion for bourbon. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to go and do an actual pick with Julian. I mean, that had to be a very memorable, special experience.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it.
Well, it's probably a good time to let's talk about what you do, Jason, a little bit. I mean, let's tell these people about Rosewood. I mean, you got Rosewood starting to do some big things here now.
So yeah, Rosewood is a brand that I bought. I bought the label. It was originally made in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And so I had a choice of different labels whenever I picked this label, and the whole reason why I picked it was the Rosewood hotels are my favorite hotels on the planet. I mean, I can't, like, better than the Ritz-Carlton. I'm not calling anybody's baby ugly, but like, so the Rosewood hotels, and then I really liked the way that the label looked, and then I found out that it was in the Shawshank Redemption, which I thought was also cool.
Yeah.
But just really wanted to bring back something cool. So like, the whole vibe about it is kind of like the Great Gatsby, old school cool, just Art Deco, just classy and cool.
Oh, it's definitely got a period look. The label does.
Thank you.
It's really good.
Yeah, and the blends that I've all tried, I mean, what you've sourced and put into these bottles has been absolutely amazing. I mean, I think the rye you absolutely hit a home run with. Like that.
Yeah.
And as you see, we don't have a bottle. I've got the guy here, and there is not a bottle of the rye on the table. Like,
I don't think I have a bottle.
I'm
right
kicking
now.
myself when you called me and you're like, you want a couple of these right now? And I was kind of like, oh, it's the holidays. I got this and that. And didn't take that advantage. And then I was hanging out with you and got to try it. And I was like, damn it, man. I'm not even trying to toot your horn here, but this is like,
thank you.
I mean, Willett's one of my favorite ryes, and that had a very, very similar profile to it for me that I absolutely loved it. I thought it was absolutely great. And then the really cool part, which I guess some of you guys have got to see, not that I had the foresight to come up with this before I went to Ohio to visit family, so I had to have Jason like run to the store and ship me and overnight me and everything else. But my grandfather actually worked at where Shawshank was filmed, at the prison there. It's about 45 minutes from where my family is all from up in Ohio.
Okay, cool.
So I got the great idea while I was there for a week that, hey, man, send me a T-shirt, send me a bottle. And I'm going to go visit it and see it. I mean, I want to see it just to see if there's any old pictures that my granddad's in or anything like that, but take some cool pictures. So we got to do a cool little impromptu photo shoot for Rosewood out there.
I thought it was
a lot of
Thank you for doing
a lot
that.
of fun. Yeah, man.
Thank
You for helping make it happen.
I'm sorry we had to overnight the box.
I mean, sometimes you got to do that when you don't have the foresight.
Wasn't it like Thanksgiving week? And
yeah, it was Thanksgiving week, and I was like, man, if we don't overnight this, I don't know if I trust 2-day for this.
Right.
But we really had a great time doing that.
What'd you pour me, Jason?
I poured you a little bit of the Rosewood. This is one of the Kentuckys. You like the Kentuckys better.
Yeah, it's good.
You like it?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like a little bit of a cinnamon bomb.
Right, yeah. It's very good.
You're the flavor profile expert.
No, it's very good. I just wanted to know which one you poured.
Yeah.
So can we talk about that a little bit? Where all are you sourcing your barrels from?
So I've only sourced from 2 different distilleries.
Okay.
BBC, Barstown Barrel Company,
Yep.
and MGPI. So what I've done is with the MGPI, I didn't do the rye from there. I did the ryes from BBC. And from MGPI, I did the 75-21-4, which is probably my favorite recipe on like the planet. It's just complete. I like the high rye bourbons.
Yeah.
Some people like the wheaters.
Yeah.
Some people like the high ryes. We can all meet in the middle, but it's. I did 2 different blends. One was a Kentucky blend from BBC,
Yeah.
which is 70-19-11, and then I did another blend from MGPI, which is the 75-21-4. And then I picked a few single barrels that were being sold online, but apparently aren't at the moment.
It happens.
Yeah.
Even when you're completely prepared and you've done all the stuff you've done to try to make some of these things happen. Randy, so let's go back to this. I'm still completely fascinated with this hotel gazebo hangout here where you have like Jimmy Russell and everybody out there. So aside from Julian, what's another like...
Sounds like Bourbon Palooza.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like, Bourbon Palooza, where you have all the rock stars of bourbon and you're just sitting on a patio. Closest thing I can come to that, like that reminds me of that, is when the only good decision I made going to Bourbon Fest the first time was I bought the Beam family barbecue tickets.
Okay.
And got to hang out with Parker and all them and get to do the whole experience with them doing the recipes of all that. So that was absolutely amazing.
Killing you. Sorry.
Well, I'll just add a little bit to the whole gazebo concept. There'd be 30 or 40 of us from around the world. And, back then there were maybe 300 people on straightbourbon.com. So that's the universe of people.
Yeah, right when it started.
And Julian was one of the participants. Drew Coolsveen was also on the forum. And so those guys would come and hang out. But the table would be about this size, and it would just be covered with bottles. And someone might bring out a George T. Stagg or whatever. And in a 3-day weekend of this activity, it wouldn't even get opened. The stuff that was being brought was
better?
Well, just different, unique,
Just different,
older, and maybe better. But we'd all had Stagg, but we see something from 1945, something
Totally
from 50, and so that's what we tended to focus on. And Julian and the Beams and the rest of them.
Wait, did you say 1950?
From the 8.
Okay.
Yeah, but but Julian would bring some unusual stuff, unlabeled, where he says, well, I have some barrels that are not quite 23. I just pulled, it's like 21 and a half years old, so I just pulled a bottle sample, and he would put it out there, and everyone taste it, and
just thieved a little 21 and a half because it's not 23 yet.
And
no big deal.
I remember too, he formed his relationship with Buffalo Trace in 2002. And of course, Stitzel-Weller and Old Fitzgerald Distillery shut down, so Buffalo Trace is going to begin supplying his whiskey.
Yeah.
So they had made some products for him, and they were still young, 4 or 5 years old at that time. So we're talking 2007 and 8, and he brought them and put them on the table. Guys, I want your honest opinion. What do you think? Because this is what ultimately is going to be going into my products someday. And I think we were honest. It was kind of they're okay, but they're not.
They're not the
They're
old
not the
juice.
old. They're not the old juice, exactly.
Yeah.
They're not the old juice. But I think he's done a pretty good job in continuing to produce a high-quality product there in partnership with Buffalo Trace.
Yeah, I think Harley's kind of figured that out for him. Harlan's kind of.
So Randy, let me ask you a question. So I know, like, you know, you had a special wedding present, I guess, barrel. What barrel was that you got?
Oh.
Didn't you get like a Stitzel-Weller?
No, obviously I bought the Lot B was from Stitzel-Weller. But if you're trying to get a story out of me, I'll tell you another story with Julian.
Okay.
So the straightbourbon.com group, they're thinking about, we want to do a bottle that we can put straightbourbon.com on. Well, in 2007, we talked to Julian, and he came back to us. He says he's got some, imagine this. He says, I've got more 23-year-old barrels than we can probably sell through our normal distribution this year. Do you guys want to come and pick some 23-year-old single barrels?
Not today.
With non-chill filtered. How about if y'all come and buy 3 barrels worth, and we'll sell them through Benny's. So Benny's cooperated with us. They were going to be the retailer. So a group called the Kentucky Barrel Society, and one of the bottles there was picked as part of that group, is chosen to go pick these 3 barrels, and they're going to have the straightbourbon.com logo, and it's going to go through Benny's. So there were 8 or 9 of us in the group that show up, and Julian is there with his son Preston. And we walk into that same tasting area, and Preston and Julian and the warehouseman are over there kind of whispering. And he comes back and he says, guys, I hate to say this, but the barrels they've rolled out here are not the barrels I picked for you guys to taste.
I remember this story.
That they're just 5 23-year-old barrels that the warehouseman rolled out. And we said, well, okay, that's fine. What happened to the other barrels? And he goes, well, here's the sad part of the story. He says, I actually picked a stinker barrel of one of the barrels. I was going to test you guys and see if you were going to be honest with me and tell me it was nasty. And he goes, that barrel got dumped into this year's 2007 Pappy 23 release.
Best part of the story. So he tried to pull a fast one.
Yeah,
And then he ended up throwing it in the blend.
That's in the warehouse.
Wow.
Dropped it in
What
the
year
blend.
is that?
That was 2007. So
that's the
Pappy
2007
23
blend.
that year had the stinker. As it turned out, and I've told people this. I've never been a big fan of the Pappy 23. I find it a little bit too woody for me. But we liked a lot of the barrels, and so we did end up buying 3 barrels of 23-year-old. And
I heard a rumor you bought 3 and somehow ended up still getting a 4th one that they weren't real happy about too.
well, that was this bottling.
Okay.
Yeah, we did.
The luck of Randy. Like, sometimes it's better to just be lucky.
You know, nobody was chasing stuff
Yeah.
back then, and so all you had to do was ask. And so the fellow that started the Kentucky Barrel Society, Cliff Michelle, asked, we'd like to do a Weller 12 bottling. And oh, by the way, we know you have some Stitzel-Weller Old Fitz barrels. Could we pick from those? And so we went there and we did. And so we ended up buying 4 barrels total. The group only picked 2. I was there, and I'm like, and this happens if you go on barrel picks.
I know.
You'll
I do
find-
it too.
you'll-
I've done it.
You'll be in a group, and the group consensus is this. And you're like, nah, I'm kind of over here. So I raised my hand and I said, I like those barrels, but that wasn't my favorite. Would you sell me a barrel? And they said, sure, we'd love to sell whiskey. So that's what that one is. That was my favorite of the 4. And then the 4th
The
one.
nose, and I just took my first
so
of it.
good.
It's
Second
awesome.
sip's even better.
It's not a knock your socks off bourbon, but
No,
when
but
you're
it's
buying
cool.
it for $16 a bottle back then, and it's it's Stitzel-Weller whiskey, it was just a no-brainer. Then the 4th barrel, they bottled one accidentally.
Yeah.
None of us picked it, and they called us up and said, "Well, guys, we've already bottled it as a single barrel. Do you want a 4th one?" Okay, so
Sure,
so
twist
we
my arm.
So we label it on the label. It says the 4th barrel. That's really interesting original name.
Really original.
A really original name. So this all happens, and about 2 months later, Julian calls me and says, "Randy, did y'all really pick? Did Buffalo Trace really sell y'all as Weller 12 for $16 a bottle? Those barrels of Stitzel-Weller whiskey. Yeah, Julian, I got it. Yeah, they did. And how'd y'all do that? We just asked them, and they rolled them out. He wasn't too happy, and I could understand because he needed all that for his product. And
I was trying to negotiate all those deals with them.
trying to get that whiskey into his bottles. And from Buffalo Trace's perspective, I mean, it would have been better for them to sell it for $35 a bottle than $16. But so we ended up back in 2005 getting that done.
So is the singlebarrel.com, like, is my understanding you were originally a part of Bourbon Pursuit too, right? Early on, was that am I getting those crossed there?
No, I've never been a part of the Bourbon Pursuit. Yeah.
Okay. Or were some of those guys just part of the single barrel, and that's where that kind of branched off from there? Maybe
they
that's
could
what
have.
I was
They could have.
thinking.
Yeah, they could have.
So they spelt it wrong?
I told them what I wanted on there, and they misspelled Stitzel.
They didn't have spell check?
2005 on the label makers.
So Stitzel is spelled Stizzlel.
Stitzlo, yeah.
Stitzlo.
Yeah. That was the Buffalo Trace.
That's how they
label.
got it
That's
through
a-
that fourth barrel.
That's how they got the fourth bottle.
radars.
Yeah. But, and it was a lot of fun back then. People weren't chasing barrels. Most of the distilleries didn't have a formal single barrel program, but if you asked, they would accommodate you and make some things happen. And as we know now, every store, every group,
Every brand,
everybody's doing it, and it's an important part of the business now.
So based on your profile, I mean, you obviously really like Weeders.
Right.
I really like Weeders as well. I'm hoping my brother-in-law is watching this because, like, he is a Weeder only guy almost.
Okay.
Like, I mean, and he loves that. He found an old bottle of his grandparents, actually two, that his grandmother just pulled out and was like, he brought it up when he got into bourbon with me shortly after I did, and he was like, "Do you still have any of Grandpa's old bourbon laying around anywhere?" And she's like, "It's
a good place
still
to
in
look."
it's still in his little bourbon cabinet over there. I've never touched it." And so he went over there and he found, I mean, two old antique 107s that were from, like, I mean, I'm guessing, like, if I remember correctly, one was from the late 70s, one was early 80s.
Yeah.
When
One
are
had
they
the
gold
cork
veins?
falling off on it, and it was like all rotted inside. I mean, it was done. He gave me that bottle, which I still put up on my bar wall just because it's a super cool bottle to have. And then the other one was perfectly preserved. And I mean, getting to try that, I mean, that's just like the pinnacle for me.
Yeah.
So as a bourbon collector now and like a big bourbon guy, you and I talked a little bit earlier on when we were getting to know each other a little bit earlier, and it doesn't sound like you still buy a whole lot of bourbon anymore, but when you do you find yourself, do you really just pursue older dusties and stuff like that, or have you found stuff in the newer arenas that you really like?
My palate has, over time, and maybe this happens with age, I tend to like the sweeter ones. And I always liked slightly sweet when I was a weeder lover, but so I'm always looking for some sort of a sweet note. If I'm
because this has a little bit of that cherry note, that
it's got that
classic cherry note in it.
Yeah, it's got the cherry and a little bit of a sweet
good.
note to it. Kind of a little cotton candy is a term I use for a lot of the old Stitzel-Weller whiskeys, is that you can always detect a little bit of that cotton candy.
Yeah.
It's like the 107s. Once you let them open up a little bit, you get that cherry. So every time I crack a 107, I put it in the back of my cabinet.
Now
Let
that
it
you
sit there
said
for a little
cotton
bit.
candy, that registers so true to me on that.
Yeah.
I get it too.
That's
You're,
excellent.
You're messing with my brain.
And then,
Well, that happens.
That happens.
and then you're also a part of one of the, in my opinion, one of the more legendary single barrel groups is the 1789 Bs. What kind of influence have you been able to have there, and what are you guys really looking for there when you guys are doing stuff now?
Yeah, that group was put together. It used to be you don't talk about it, but now everybody
knows now.
But it was put together in 2010, and it was a kind of a spin-off of the straightbourbon.com website, because that had grown and there were so many people, and there's just so much noise, like on the Facebook pages. There just gets to be noise. And a couple of the fellas says, let's just go form our own little social group. And it's not about barrel picks. It's not strictly about whiskey. It's going to have like a three-legged stool. we're going to talk about cigars, we're going to talk about whiskey, we're going to talk about food, and we're going to keep it small. So they set the cap at 70 people. But fairly quickly, whiskey became the dominant topic, and buying barrels came up.
But before 1789, there was the cigar group, which plays in job opening.
I knew I was going to do that. Haven't done
You
that
are
since
fired.
episode, what, 2? Haven't done that since like episode 2.
Tell everybody a little bit about the cigar group that was first.
Yeah, 1789B is, one of the years that they said bourbon was invented, and B for bourbon. They had a 1492C was the name of the cigar group. And as we know, Columbus discovered America, and C for cigars. So it was a lot of the same guys. They're back on the East Coast. Great guys. Most of them had also been early participants on the straightbourbon.com forum. But it was really started to be more social talk about it. And then it evolved into, we started picking barrels and really nice guys. I didn't really organize any of the barrel selections in that group. That's kind of handled by the guys that founded it. But I participated in many of them, particularly early on. And I think we're up to 150 or 200 barrels that we've bought in 12 years. But it's not all bourbon. It's some rum, some Armagnacs, cognacs. We've kind of branched out as it's become more difficult to get access to good bourbon.
Do you think that's really derived from just the fact that it's really hard to get bourbon single barrels now? Or, as I found in my bourbon journey, I have gone from being somebody that just really liked the Weeders early on. I was a big Crown Royal guy early on, and then I kind of like gravitated towards some other things. And then early on in my bourbon journey, I didn't go chasing the allocated stuff because I was very late to the game. And to me, chasing that, I wanted to go find some of these guys that were doing craft stuff, like the guys that were old family recipes, old guys that were like trying to really make a name for themselves, doing innovative, neat things. It's where I really gravitated towards like Spirits of French Lick and some other things like that, where I wanted to find stuff that you could find. Maybe you had to go to that state, and maybe it wasn't sold here, but I gravitated towards that, and I started experimenting in that whole line. But then I kind of graduated from that, and then it was, into more of the bourbon clubs, and then it was trying a lot of these single barrels. And then here over the last, I'd say, year and a half or so, I've gotten into the Armagnacs and the cognacs, and I drink a lot more of that than I do just regular bourbon. And then I would say in the last 8 months, I've bought more tequila than I've bought bourbon. Yeah. I've sold more of my bourbon collection, or have my bourbon collection for sale, than I have purchased bourbon bottles. So how much of that would you say? I mean, like, is that a big part too? Just
exactly. It's
palates changing and growing.
Exactly. And we had explored the bourbon category about as much as it could have been explored. Yeah. Except all the new craft guys. So we were always willing to try new things, and your palate evolves over time, your interests do, and so part of it, a good part of it is probably that, and not just that it's difficult to get access to something special. It's just the natural evolution of the group.
And it sounds like that's also opened up a lot for you personally too. I talk about that with the cigar lounge and stuff like that. It's a great introduction to people. That's why we share cigars and share bourbon there in the podcast. But it sounds like, you and I were talking about some travel and stuff like that you've formed some of these groups with lifelong friendships now. How impactful has that from the bourbon community been on your personal life with friends and family?
Unlike, what was it Al Gore said the internet was going to make everybody go sit at their desk, and I've met some of my best friends in the world on the internet through bourbon or spirits related activities. Yeah. I mean, people, and we travel together now. We go see them. We organize vacations together. The 1789B group, for years, we would rent a big house in North Carolina on the beach, and 13-bedroom house, and we would all get there and bring bottles and have a big bottle share. And so it does evolve into, it's as much a social thing as it is the bourbon. Yeah. And I think every group that ends up happening, that you get together, not because Randy's going to open up something or Garrett's going to open up something special. I just want to hang out with those guys, have a cigar, let's see what's going on in life. And
what I really call it is just like turning your Facebook friends into real friends.
Right.
I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. Like, so everybody has like their own little Facebook crew and group and everything else. And I run a couple groups. But like, whenever I get to like hang out with my friends, then like, that's what, like,
I think that's
it's the community more than anything.
Oh, yeah.
To me, it's 100% the community.
I think we've seen that in the last 5 years, especially where you've got these monster bourbon groups that the internet and social media has blown up, and then you haven't seen as many of the 1789Bs or the ones that start off and keep it small and do that, because there's so many other avenues that these groups have tried to go or have gone. And I think it's important to kind of, hopefully I would like to see more of that where you have some other spin-off groups like that. That's why I talk about them quite a bit on here. It's one of my favorite groups to be a part of is the Locals. These guys all get together once a week, typically, to have lunch together. And it's not just about bourbon, we sit around and have lunch.
Yeah, we talk about work, we talk about everything.
Work, life, and everything else. And I think that's an important aspect, no matter what your hobby and passion are, is to kind of try to find a way to align those things. So I think you've done an excellent job of doing that. You probably have everybody be with the coolest stories with it.
Well, I mean, they did combine food, cigars.
Yeah, food, cigars, travel.
I mean, it sounds kind of sexy.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun. But, there's groups like us, all over the country. But as you said, like the Houston Bourbon Society, it's, 6,000, 7,000.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. It's gotten so big, you can't hold a social, without excluding 99% of the people in there. So
exactly.
It's
hurting feelings.
Yeah, exactly. So you end up having these smaller groups or subsets that get together and do stuff together.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's actually why I started BSM. I couldn't get into any of the cool
kids.
I couldn't get into any of the cool kid clubs. So I made it, instead of it, like, everything is like so exclusive, right? With the small clubs. That's why I made BSM to where it would just be a big club for everybody, and everybody was invited.
And a lot of people, changing subjects slightly, talk about, well, those were the good old days when Randy and his guys were getting started. And in many ways it was. You could go into the store and good to great bourbons would be on the shelf and $50 or less. And but there was absolutely no new products being developed. I mean, the bourbon shelf or the bourbon aisle in your store in 2000 looks just like it did in 1990, or it may have even been smaller. So there was really no new products coming out. And then in 2000, Buffalo Trace came out with the Saz 18 and Eagle Rare 17, and then George T. Stagg in 2002, and I think William LaRue Weller in 2005. And that was kind of the genesis of new stuff coming out. Nowadays, I can't walk into the store and walk down the aisle, and I'll see 3 or 4 new products every time I go to the store.
Yeah.
And so while it was good back then, there were no craft distillers. The big guys were producing the same stuff they'd produced for the last 20 years. No finishing.
No finishing.
Right. You think about all the stuff that's done experimentally now, none of that was out there. So yeah, it's different, but the choices that a guy getting into bourbon now he's got almost too many. I mean, he's got.
I would agree with that.
Almost.
I would 100% agree with that, and that's why I've got 100 bottles in my closet that I don't want to drink, because you figure out what you like.
Yeah.
And then you just
It's the
drink. You just drink what you like.
Well, you go from buying everything you see,
Right.
to focusing, I figured out what I don't like and I like, and then you focus on that.
Yeah.
And that's just the natural evolution of every enthusiast.
Exactly.
And,
That's actually why I did the same recipe as Blonde Bros for my Rosewood, because that's my favorite bourbon.
Yeah. What do you think's one of the best life lessons you've learned or come across from your experiences in bourbon?
When I got into it as an enthusiast and joining the straightbourbon.com forum, I never thought I'd make some really good friends. I mean, that was the last. I wanted to learn. And then I literally, some of my best friends I've made through that. And so there's one thing that your friends can come from
putting yourself
activities.
out there. And,
Just being out there and meeting people and whatnot. So that's definitely one. And, not just unique to bourbon, but relationships still matter in any endeavor. And it really matters in the bourbon world. And, if you want to get out there and try some of these things, some bottles that no longer exist or are difficult to get, you're going to have to be out there and socialize a little bit and get to know the guys. And lo and behold, you'll get invited to a tasting here or there. And that's really the only way to do it. You just can't raise your hand. Hey, I want to go to
Julian Van Winkle party.
I want to go. You're going to have to,
Wait, that doesn't happen?
Build relationships. And,
that's one of my favorite stories about Julian and his son Preston. I don't know if you know this one. Have you read Pappyland?
I have not read Pappyland.
Okay, I highly recommend it. I think you'll find a lot of interesting stuff in there. It was a very well-written book. One of my favorite stories, and it's kind of with me, I got razzed pretty hardcore about chasing craft distillers and stuff early on, and that I wasn't, just this guy that had all this, B-tack and all this other stuff. I mean, I can remember those days in my early on with the bourbon clubs pretty well. But one of my favorite stories that he told, I remember Julian told this when he was doing that live podcast with the book release, or if it was just something I read in the book. But Julian and Preston were hanging out in New York, meeting with one of their big bars that, they have a relationship with. And Preston says, I'll go get the drinks. So Preston goes up to the bar and he sees Pappy up on the bar and tells the bartender, I would like to get that Pappy 23 up there. I would like, 1 cube of ice in there and a twist of lemon peel in there. And this bartender looked at him and was like, are you from outer space? Like, I'm not doing that to Pappy. If you want that Pappy, you're going to drink it neat. And Preston was like, really? He's like, that's how I would prefer to drink it. And the guy's like, I can't do it. He goes, well, my grandfather preferred it that way. My dad prefers it that way. And quite honestly, I prefer it that way. And by the way, I'm Preston Van Winkle. I'd really like to have that if you don't mind. And then the guy's like just falling over. He's like, holy shit, I just told Preston Van Winkle I won't make him his Pappy the way he wants it.
Just called his baby ugly.
Yeah. And that's right about Julian and Preston. They prefer cocktails as much as anything else.
Too.
That's how they drink their bourbon. Back in the early days of the Whiskey Fest, and I think they had it in different cities, Chicago, New York. I'd go to the one in Chicago, and we'd go to either Twisted Spoke or Delilah's, and Preston and Julian would be behind the bar making old fashions or Manhattans with their rye, and they would be back there being the bartender, and because they liked selling their whiskey in a cocktail because that's a great way to drink whiskey.
Yeah,
I 100% agree.
Yeah, neat is too, but man,
neat's great, but cocktails are fantastic.
Cocktails are fun.
The Beams said that too when they were talking. I forget what's the youngest Beams name right now that's running the show up there. I don't know. I forget what his name is right now. I can't think of it. Anyways, when I was at that family barbecue at the Bourbon Fest, there's this little old lady that stood up, same kind of thing, and they were doing kind of a Q&A thing, and she said, I forget what special release they had out, but it was some special release, and she said, I got a question for you. And he, his dad obviously wasn't there. This was during COVID, and with his health and his age, they weren't letting him go to events like this. But he was like, I'll take a question, and she says, my son-in-law told me that I committed a sin. And he was like, okay. And she was like, yeah, I bought some of this bourbon here. It's always been my favorite. I bought it, and I like to drink my bourbon with Pepsi in it. And I poured Pepsi in it.
I've never heard Pepsi, but I've heard Diet Coke with Pappy 23.
She said, I poured Pepsi in it, and he about fell on the floor. Did I really commit a sin? And he goes, ma'am, you drink it. She goes, was it the best damn one you've ever had? And she goes, absolutely. Yeah. And he goes, then you drink it however you like it. And I'm pretty sure my dad 100%. And my grandfather would tell you the same damn thing.
100%.
Yeah.
So I always find it, you see some of these guys and it's, they even prefer it in cocktails, like you're saying, a lot of time. It's like, it's not a one-trick pony here that you just have to drink a certain way. It's made to be enjoyed however you like to enjoy it.
So one other thing I know, like, about us is we like our bourbon cold, right?
I'll put an ice cube in mine.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Me too.
And of course, a lot
like,
of the
and like
guys
some
don't-
people will be like, "You're not drinking it neat."
You're committing ego suicide.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. I'm like, I
ice
can
in
drink
there.
it however the fuck.
Yeah. The Straight Bourbon Group would have a bourbon tasting competition every year. It's a lot of fun. It'd be different kinds of formats, but it's basically a blind tasting, and you're trying to pick exactly what it is. And Chuck Cowdery, the spirits writer, won it the first 2 years we had it. I ended up winning it a couple of years after I
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row.
But I'm tasting my samples, and I'm putting an ice cube in it. And one of the competitors said, time out, that's not right. He's adding something to it. He needs to drink it neat. And I said, if I drank it neat, I might not recognize it. I am so used to drinking it chill
With an ice
with a
cube.
little ice cube to
Me too.
recognize what it is. And so I admit, I like mine with an ice cube or two.
So third year they wouldn't let them use ice.
Yeah, yeah.
Is what the story is.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me use ice.
So Randy didn't go the third year to the competition
Yeah.
after winning 2 years in a row.
You know, I only have.
It was a small competition. you
Yeah.
know.
Hey, whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
Whatever.
personally, you know, myself, I only have one thing that I try to be pretty consistent on when I try a new bourbon is that the first pour, you know, doesn't have to be a big pour or anything like that. The first pour I always try to have neat. You know, just so that I can really taste it,
Right.
and then I'll add an ice cube or something like
Right,
that.
yeah.
Especially if it's hot. I mean, I'm not somebody that likes 140 proof, just kick yourself in the dirt bourbon all the time.
I'll drink
that-
80
now
proof.
I don't mind one if it doesn't drink like it's 140, you know, and it's, you know,
When
a
it's-
lot tamer. But I don't like burning my esophagus out, you know, and having acid reflux all night. Maybe that's part of just getting old, but
Well, in Texas, when it's 95 degrees on your porch,
yeah.
140 proof is tough to get down. Sitting outside and having
For
a cigar
sure.
or whatnot, it needs a little ice or at least chilled or a little bit of water to help.
I
help,
agree.
Help.
Open it up.
Yeah, open it up and not burn your esophagus
Yeah.
and not overheat you because you're already hot.
So what are some of your guys' favorite cocktails when you're not just drinking bourbon straight?
I like the same two that everybody else likes.
No, old fashioned Manhattan.
Old-fashioned.
Old fashioned. Give me
Yeah.
a Manhattan.
Old
One of the
fashioned
two.
or Manhattan.
But I like it like so. What I figured out is like Brooke up at Scissors and Scotch, right down the street. Like she can make it with some different kinds of bitters and stuff, and it totally changes the game. So like for
Right.
me, whenever they're using like the different little
Jason's
adjuncts
getting his
to it-
dating plug in here right now.
Not at all. But like so whenever they can like make something special with your stuff, so that's my favorite thing about drinking. I like the cocktails. I've really started to get into the cocktails in the last year.
See, and
or
I
so.
think that's what I think in the last 4 or 5 years, that's what, or maybe even further back than that, I think that's where bourbon really regenerated hardcore was you kind of had craft beer take over for a while.
Right.
And these guys weren't selling as much bourbon. You know, everybody wanted a craft beer. And then as craft beer started getting bought out by the Diageos of the world, stuff like that, that, you know, they started buying up these craft beers and that started changing. Then it wasn't so prestigious because it wasn't your little home brewery in your neighborhood.
Right.
Then that started changing. Well, I think what bourbon did really well was they started infusing these like cocktail making bartenders and introducing old cocktails, classic cocktails, and new cocktails, and really creating an atmosphere of competing in that and regenerating that to bring the passion back towards bourbon.
Totally
And
agree.
I think that hit really hard at the right time.
Throw a whiskey sour in there too, man. That's number 3.
Yeah, that's
Third on my list would be a Boulevardier,
What's that?
which is essentially a Negroni. Do you know what a Negroni is?
Keep
sub-
going.
Well, it's
'Cause these-
it's equal parts vermouth, gin, and Campari.
Really?
The red bitter.
uh-huh.
So that's a Negroni. Replace the gin with bourbon, and that's a Boulevardier. And it brings bitterness.
Boulevardier.
But the vermouth adds sweetness, The Campari is the bitterness, and then
Yeah.
you've got the bourbon, and that's another good one. So
Have you guys ever done the Bloody Mary with bourbon instead
No.
of vodka?
No.
Oh God, go to Kentucky, man. They'll feed you one.
All right. I'll have to
I
try
think that's
that.
how they make them up there.
The other one that there's a guy at the lounge up here that I'm waiting to try it, and I'm sure it's going to be absolutely phenomenal now that I've gone down this road a little more. Swears by he can beat any old fashioned you can make with a cognac old fashioned.
I would try that.
I'd try that.
I would try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in.
I'd try that, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
He's a big advocate of that, and I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to add that in there in the mix at some point.
Try the Sunday morning Bloody Mary when you run out of vodka and just put your like Buffalo Trace in it or something, or a little
Yeah.
bit of Rosewood or something.
All right, we can do
Let's
that.
get a plug in, yeah. Put some
I'm
Rosewood
trying.
in there.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
I even brought him his T-shirt back. I was on top of it. I did not forget today. I was like the one thing I was set out to make sure I did not do today.
Well, I live in Houston, and you guys are here in Dallas.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Dallas bourbon community. Is it pretty active? And
It's very active. So as you know, your good friend Christopher Hart,
right,
him and Randall Sullivan have partnered up. They do the Prideful Goat.
right.
And Christopher Hart has all his stuff down there at the bourbon side. Randall has Someone Say Whiskey up here. The same thing as you're talking about down there. I mean, Someone Say Whiskey, I think, is at like 16,000 people in the group all over the U.S. So obviously I'm impressed that they're
Someone
able to.
say whiskey is at 19,000.
I was going to say, yeah, last time I checked, I mean, it's up there. But to me, most barrels are going to produce 240 bottles on a good day, depending on what it is. You got 19,000 people and 240 bottles. I mean,
Yeah.
that gets a little hairy, of a lot of people. How they're able to maintain those numbers and keep those people happy and involved in the community is very impressive to me.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the bourbon game's changing again a little bit. My prediction for 2023 was we're going to see a renaissance in tequila. I think tequila, not just because I've been drinking more tequila over the last 8 months, but you can find old tequilas. People are doing a lot of stuff with tequila that they were doing with bourbon 10, 12 years ago, and I see it making the big push. You've also got the big thing with celebrities now endorsing bottles and getting behind different spirits, and you're seeing, whether it's Ryan Reynolds or The Rock or,
Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, Sammy Hagar or,
Yeah.
You name
You
it.
name
There's a ton of them that are just popping these different brands out there that they're, non-distiller producers, or they're buying distilleries and starting up stuff. It's,
Like Jason got on.
I think it's, you got the Jason Geils over there buying old labels and stuff like that. But I mean, I think it's really cool to see stuff like that. Like, somebody to bring back an old label
Yeah.
and do something unique with it. I hope some of these craft distillers really start honing in their skills and not just try to do something that is so uniquely different, that now that they also start venturing down go taste some of those dusty bottles and really, see if you can create that again. Like, because there's a very fine line in the palate of a lot of these dusties. That's kind of where I've gone with bourbon now is, I'll try and sell, 10, 12 bottles of whatever it is I have that everybody wants now, and then I'm going to see one of my buddies that has some of these old dusties, and I'll buy 2 bottles just because I enjoy that old bourbon taste that you can't find it as much anymore. And for somebody to be able to do that, and I think it's going to take one of these really interesting people like what is his name? The guy that's doing, he owns those, he's doing all the yeast strains and stuff like that. And he sells a lot of people their own yeast strains. That Wilderness Trail, I believe, up there. That
They've got a good reputation.
Yeah.
They've got a great reputation,
product.
and he's bringing back a lot of these old yeast strains. And he's working with people like Alan Bishop, who's bringing back heritage, what do you call it? Like heritage grains and different strands of they're going back through the what do you call it? Like the seed depository and
Right.
bringing back these old heirloom corns and stuff like that. That I think if the way it's been booming, if enough money goes into some of that and bringing back some of that it's going to take one Alan Bishop bringing back a corn strain or a yeast strain that allows somebody to make something that really tastes like old Stitzel-Weller or something older, and that's going to blow up, I think. I mean, I think that's the next little niche that everybody's...
I'm a rye guy.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of like what New Riff has been doing. Right, even though it's only 4 to 5 years old, I mean their rye is spectacular. They've done the Balboa rye, which is phenomenal. It's a smaller grain than the regular rye, so it gives more flavor.
Well, I think
more
as
punch.
people's palates change and people start trying the ryes, and there's a big group that's going to like that, then you're going to see there's a big demand for rye. And you look at the bourbon shelves when you go down any one of the big stores. Rye's like this, everything else is this times 10. If that takes off and people start digging in that, then you're going to see the reverse thing. Then all the rye is going to be allocated.
It's a little bit more expensive, but like I just like the flavor so much more than like just the straight corn whiskey.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
You know, I don't follow the craft guys much. Is anybody doing focusing on the barrels and maybe looking for old oak trees and having barrels made out of really old trees, which I've heard is one of the differences is why the old bourbons taste better is because they were made out of older trees because we weren't harvesting them nonstop to make barrels.
I don't know about the older tree story, but like I know that like when I went to New Riff last time, I put my little search team and all we wanted to do was find Kelvin barrels, right? So you can tell a barrel by the rivet.
Right.
So they give us a list of barrels, we go around, we check them out, and I'm like, everything with a smooth rivet, we want to taste that. So if you like the notes and it's got a smooth rivet, let's do that. Because I think Kelvin puts out probably some of the best barrels right now. The bourbon that they're putting out is the best, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
8%
I know
is the cooperage.
the only other person I know that's doing anything like that would be, I would say, probably Rabbit Hole. Rabbit Hole's doing those Mizunara casks, which is that Japanese wood barrels that they're, those barrels, if your normal barrel's $300, that barrel is $1,200. So then you're paying an absolute premium for the juice that was aged in that. But I think that's another avenue for people to really look at is exploring the barrel science there too. And like you said, maybe finding some older wood. I wonder how much it'll change though if they have to go outside of the U.S. You go Canada or somewhere where you can find these same trees to do that. Because I'm sure geographically that will have an effect too. That a lot of them originally back then, I bet the majority of those trees were coming from that East Coast side, central U.S. right there, one side of the river or the other.
Right. Yep.
And until you get some more age in those as they're replanting all that stuff, I don't think you'll see that for a while.
Yeah.
So Maker's Mark is doing a really cool project, and Maker's Mark is one of the coolest companies on the planet. You like Maker's Mark?
Sure.
So they own their own water shed, and they just planted like trees for like a 200-year project or something, so that like they're going to be able to make their own barrels forever. So like Maker's Mark is one of the coolest companies on the planet as far as bourbon goes for me. And their stay program is the best thing bourbon ever had happen to it, in my opinion. Because you can make something out of Maker's Mark that does not taste like Maker's Mark at all.
Yeah.
And I did 3 of them a couple of years ago, and it's like still some of my like favorite bourbon.
Yeah, you get a lot of inflection of flavor out of those different staves. It'd just be interesting to see
their stay
who can,
program is phenomenal.
who can maximize that the most.
You like the Choco Taco?
Yeah, I did.
Choco Taco is really good.
Yeah, you gave me a sample of that.
Yeah.
So what other things, Randy, let's talk about some of your other interests here a little bit, because it looked like you are really also into cars and racing. Are you like, because I got addicted to F1 this last year up here, so I'm a little curious where you fall on this race car stuff, because I've seen a lot of stuff.
So like Randy's the only I only know 2 people with lifts in their garage so they can park a race car underneath another race car.
Yeah, I've been a car guy my whole life, but never thought about it seriously as a business. And me and one of my buddies I met through straightbourbon.com and another mutual friend, we put a race team together, and so it would be a reason for us to all get together. And so we raced in the Pirelli World Challenge for 7 years, starting back in 2010. And I'm a road track guy, so I like driving my cars on the road track. But yeah, I'm definitely into road tracks and love cars, and I'm no longer into racing, but I still have a couple of cars that are fun to drive. And actually, Kentucky, since we're talking about bourbon, the road course down where the Corvette factory is in Bowling Green is an excellent road track. So that was another reason to always make a trip to Kentucky, is to stop there, go to the museum. If I brought one of my cars with me, go around the track there at the Corvette Museum track. But yeah, and like I said, I got together and formed the team with another straight bourbon guy, and it was as much a reason to get together everyone. The social aspect, he kind of gets back to the whole social aspect.
Yeah.
And with the racing, the girls enjoyed it, because my wife Val made a couple of trips to Kentucky. I've kind of seen it. I stayed at the Best Western, General Nelson enough. The rooms smell like you know what. She wouldn't come, but boy, you talk about racing. All of a sudden, we're going to Florida. We're going up to California. We're racing all over the country, and she was
renewed interest,
and my
extra
buddy's
hall
wife.
passes.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly.
So
let me ask, what's in the garage?
Right now, I have a 2014 Z28
With a crate engine in it.
Well, I pulled the factory engine out.
Right.
So you have an LS what in it?
It was LS7, so that's
Right.
what came in the 14 Z28. So I pulled the factory LS7 out and put a built motor in it, LS7, another LS7, but completely built, balanced and blueprinted, new exhaust system, and so forth. And then
What's Val's car?
Val's car is
Here we go.
is an Audi R8, the performance model from 2020.
It's freaking
So,
gorgeous.
yeah,
I'm going back to the
that's
12 again because it sucks so
and
bad.
going back to the racing, we raced over the years. We started out racing Camaros when they came back in 2010.
Okay.
So we were one of the first teams racing Camaros.
I love that. My first car was an 83 Z28.
Okay, so we raced Camaros for a couple of years. Then we moved over and raced the Ford Mustang, and we ended up racing Porsche Cup cars in the Porsche Cup
Sexy.
Series. And that's when we won a championship racing Porsche Cup cars. I was not the driver. Our driver was a young man who still is in the racing game and in the racing business. And there again, we made another good set of friends with him and his parents. The social aspect, which racing is a really social activity. So
Yeah, there's a lot of guys up here at the lounge that are really into their cars and the racing and stuff like that. They got me, and I'd be coming in from golf on the weekends, and there'd be this whole F1 event here. And my brother-in-law, you know, his family used to have a place that was over on the condo at the Texas Motor Speedway.
Right.
And they're big NASCAR people. And I'll admit, you know, especially in my younger days, single, whatnot, partying at a NASCAR thing, that's tons of fun. You know, but that's the party in the infield, getting down in the pits,
Right.
that's really fun. But to sit and watch these guys go around an oval track, I could not get into it. This waiting to watch somebody crash. Like,
Right.
The only
I
cool
did
thing
not
about
want
it
that.
is like waiting for somebody to crash.
Yeah, it was like, but then I tried to get into, what's the other one before F1? It's like the in-between.
IndyCar?
IndyCar.
IndyCar.
My dad took me to some Indy stuff when I was a kid, and then we tried to look at some Indy stuff. Tried watching Indy a little bit. That was better, but then when I started seeing the F1 and all that, where these guys are, you know, driving through these very intricate tracks and flying
Or
by the seat
streets.
of their pants in basically a jet.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just blown away, and like all of a sudden, and then I started watching the show on Netflix and stuff like that.
That's a good show.
Oh man, I can't wait for the new season to come out and see about all the. Now that I actually watched last season, and then I can see all the other behind-the-scenes drama and all that. Highly looking forward to that. But there's a lot of people that are really into that up here, that are into the cars. So
Well, our race series, the Pirelli World Challenge, we raced in conjunction with the IndyCar series.
Okay.
So they're the main event.
Yeah.
And we're like the opening act. We would race right before them because people go to the track, they want to watch racing all day.
Yeah.
So, but we raced with the Indy cars.
Okay.
We never raced ovals because Indy does ovals and road courses. So we were always on a road course.
Well, the one thing I learned, I used to think I can, I have a couple M3s and some other track cars, did all that. Nah. That we have a Eagle Canyon Raceway out here.
You do. That's a good track.
I went for a day with the Frakes, did my thing, jumped in M2, thought I was good. I sat in the passenger seat of a GT3 Porsche.
Oh,
that
shit.
dude slung me around that track so fast. By the third lap, he had to pull over and I had to throw up.
Yeah.
When I say there's nothing I can do to touch the way that guy whipped that car around the track, and imagine 30 other people knowing what they're doing on that level, so much respect.
Yeah.
That's
And
crazy.
nobody touches each other.
Most people think
for the most
they know
part.
what the limit of their car is.
No.
You put a professional
no.
driver in the car,
said
and he'll
no.
show you what the limit of
I
that
drove
car
the
is.
same car, and he drove that thing so vicious, I had to double check it was the same car. Like, there's no way we're taking this Apex at 113 miles an hour, and then he sped up. I'm like, no, I can't do this.
I mean, we got
was-
Derek on the side. He's got a Lotus. He works for
Yeah.
Lotus.
One of the best handling cars ever.
Well, like the Frakes up here, they're big car guys up here a lot, and Brandon is ate up with racing, and he goes and does a lot of these track days and stuff, and he's got an older Porsche that he takes out
He
there.
has a 928. And
Yeah.
Okay.
It was his
shit.
dad's
Okay.
car. Excellent
Nice.
condition.
Nice.
Yeah, and he recently got a simulator. I haven't made it out to use the simulator, but I mean, I've heard stories of
Those
the
are
guys
fun.
getting sick in
You
the
get sick with
simulator
that.
and
Sick in the
everything else.
simulator,
That
yeah.
It's so realistic. I was like, I
Does
gotta
it have
try
like
this.
G-Force too?
It's VR
virtual.
goggles.
Oh, so
that
it's all in your
alone-
head.
Yeah, that alone will
So you
make
got
you
the
off.
headphones in, you got the VR, you're in the
Yeah.
you're in the
So
little
it's
cockpit
real.
seat. It's
Yeah.
the real deal. Holy
Got some sensors on you?
Yeah.
Well, I was lucky in that because we were racing professionally, I had my driver who could get in the car. And I tell everybody, let a professional drive it first, and you'll learn a lot in a hurry. What the proper line is, where to brake, when to accelerate.
100%.
You learn so much with a professional behind the wheel. So I
Hit
spent a
that
lot
peak,
of I had a
hit
lot
that
of
peak and
instruction.
accelerate.
I had a lot of instruction time with our driver. And,
Nice.
yeah. that
So
was
do you
nice.
prefer to drive Val's car or your car?
Actually
on
I
the
like
track?
the Z28.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was built for the track. It was a track car designed for that, and I just put a little more horsepower in it. And
What kind of horsepower is it pushing?
it's probably 650 at the crank. It's around 600 at the rear wheels.
Cool.
So it's not super. It's not a big
It's not
number.
crazy,
No, because
but-
you can go out and buy a car off the lot now making 800 horsepower with the
Yeah.
supercharged or turboed. But mine's all normally aspirated. I'm a big NA guy. I don't want a power adder. I like to run.
No
Yeah.
forced induction.
No
just straight
forced-
engine.
Yeah, that's all my cars
turbos.
have been that way. So
That's awesome. So what was your first major car? Like when it comes to that, like like
that goes back to high school.
Yeah,
and I
like-
bought my aunt's '69 SS Chevelle.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
So this is how it started.
Yeah, that's
That's
how,
what I'm
so-
asking.
yeah, that's how you. That's
this
how you
is
get,
how it started.
That's how you get started.
Yeah.
And that was the first car I actually, had a job, had to pay for.
Yeah.
Isn't that the Dazed and Confused car? Or one of them?
It's
think it's
close.
one of them.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
my first car was an '83 Z28 Camaro.
Okay.
And then I totaled it 6 months later. Being a 16-year-old drag racing my Camaro, and then I bought my dad's '89 Mustang off of him. He totaled it when we were moving to Texas, and then when I moved to Texas, I found a '70 Chevelle, and that's the car that I still to this day wish I could have
the big
back.
old
It got
big block.
frame rot.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford at the time to take it off the frame, put another frame under it, and everything else. But yeah, that you get back to that 66 through 72 Chevelle or Nova. I'm all in.
GTOs?
My mom's is the GTO. My mom had a goat in high school, and she still talks about it. It's funny, we joke about this in my family. My dad tried teaching me how to drive stick because obviously my '83 was a stick. And I came home and told my mom, I was like, I don't know what dad's doing, but I can't do this.
Yeah.
My mom said, don't worry, I'll take you. So my mom takes me apart. I thought what my dad was trying to teach me was tough and whatnot, and he was burning the shit out of my clutch. I mean, I could tell, I could smell it, you know. I'm like, this is not going good. He doesn't know what he's doing. I asked my mom, and if you've met my mom, like, my mom does not look like some kind of street racer, but in reality, my grandfather, unfortunately, he got cancer right after he retired and wasn't able to come up and help me, but he was going to buy me a 65 Mustang. We were going to restore it because he knew everything about that Ford motor and, you know, teach me how to do everything on that car so that if anything ever happened, I could do it. Well, that didn't get to happen, but my mom takes me out there. My mom comes out with damn cones and stuff. She makes me drive in reverse through these cones without hitting cones. And then I'll never forget this. My mom goes, "You want to see what your car can really do?" And I was like, yeah. My mom white smokes my tires that I just bought.
Yeah.
White smokes them, and she is just tearing my car up. And I'm like, where did this come from, Donna
Where did
Reed?
Mom come from?
Yeah.
I didn't know my mom was so cool.
Yeah, my mom's like, oh, well, you know, my dad would always go out and he'd tune my carburetor down and stuff like that and tell me not to drag race, but I'd get out there on my goat and, you know, open it all up, tune my carburetor, and my mom was out drag racing and stuff. I'm like, this is insane.
Everybody's got one cool parent.
Yeah.
What's crazy is my first car was an '89 Mustang GT. I was
Nice.
17.
Did you have
in
the
Army.
5.0?
Yeah.
Nice.
I had it for 4 months.
Boys
I was in the
in the
Army,
hood.
And then
and
you
I had
wrecked
to
it.
sell it because the insurance was more than a car payment. Literally, I couldn't
It's because
afford
you
it.
were 18.
Exactly. And I sold it to my drill sergeant after I got out. But the crazy thing is what you said. That car was only like 225 horses, but it had a lot of torque, and we
Right.
thought that was crazy. Now you can buy a jailbreak Challenger with 890 horses off
And
the
it's
lot.
completely
And it's
different.
insane. And we used to think 5.0s were fast.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I
my
mean,
first-
they can be, but not compared to what you
they
get
can be
now.
really fast. My first fast car was a Camaro with an LT1
Yeah.
with the T-tops, and I got rid of it because the T-tops were...
Well, you know, when they did that, like
My 83 didn't leak ever. Like, I don't
Mine
know
did.
how I got so lucky
Mine
with
did.
T-tops that mine did not leak.
Mine would whistle when I got over 130 miles
I had
an hour.
I had an 88 IROC, and because it was a convertible,
Nice.
it came with a 305 versus the T-top had a 350 in it.
Right,
And I was
right.
like, this sucks.
Right.
I was like,
It's like not enough.
Yeah, I sold it quick.
Yeah,
but-
Donna, I had to
That
ask you
LT1
that
engine
because
was
my
awesome.
dad
Yes.
had, when I was a kid, a 280 Datsun Z with glass packs on it, and I still remember that sound. So when you said that, I had to ask that question.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that
I had a
car was
K5
so
with
loud.
cherry bombs on it.
Whoa.
It was a little different. It was really fun dropping my kids off at school whenever I had that K5
I'm sure.
on 40s.
Now I just piss off all my neighbors when I cold start my truck because it has an outlaw muffler on it with duals, and
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
think about that. And my whole neighborhood comes out
You
like,
gotta let it warm up though. You gotta let it warm up.
what you want me to do? I
gotta
gotta,
let
I
it
gotta
warm up.
leave.
You
It's
have to.
remote start. It's cold outside.
You have
I'm
to.
used to it, but I'm pretty much the neighborhood alarm clock. They know it's time to get the
Mo,
kids
mo,
off
mo,
to
mo,
school.
mo, mo, mo.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask Jason a question. So you've done some bourbons and ryes.
Yeah.
Is there a different spirit maybe in the future, a rum or something else, or are you going to stay with the brown water for now?
So my initial love is like Garrett's like second love. Like so I started out with like really old, like 200-year-old like Armagnacs and like cognacs and like crazy stuff like that. That's how I got into spirits. But no, the answer is no. Like to me this is pure. And I like it the way it is, and I like to be able to make a drink out of it. Like I'm never gonna do anything. I'm not gonna say never, but not for now. Like I really
Yeah.
like what I'm doing, and I really like what I'm putting out. Like everything to me that I'm putting out is exactly the way that I want it to be. It tastes exactly the way that I want it to taste. Like it's my flavor profile. So
When are you going to have some more rye available?
soon?
Soon? All right.
And it's probably 10 times harder than you thought it was going to be.
Love you, man. Love you, man. A little bit.
It's,
No, it's been harder than I thought it was gonna be.
yeah, I mean, any business, any startups, is
Yeah,
tough.
but I mean, I'm super. I'll say
like,
it too. I'm super
so-
proud of what you've done because I mean, I remember when you first started talking about this when I first met you and you
It's been
bought
like
that
a year.
label.
It's been like a year.
Yeah, but you started this. I mean, whether it started when you go back to when you were doing picks, to when you bought the label and all that, and the amount of work you've put into it. I just want to tell you, I mean, as your friend, I'm proud of what you've put out there. Like, not
I'm
many
really happy
people
with
can
what's in the
actually
bottle.
take it even that far.
There's talkers and doers. I'm just really happy with what's in the bottle.
You should be. It's
Thank
good
you.
stuff. You should be, yeah.
I know I keep going back to that Weller 12, but I mean, come on, like it's not every day.
Yeah, you're going to
But you
drink
get
something.
a 2005 Weller 12 for $16.
I mean,
I don't even feel bad about heavy pouring because you only paid $16 for it.
You drink all you want. Hopefully there's some left to go to the next bottle share. But,
Yeah. Which is about time, right?
yeah, we're getting there. Which leads me to I'm going to go ahead and take us to towards the end of the show, which we have a certain set of questions we ask every guest at the end. So I'm going to start. I'm going to bounce between you two. Randy, do you have kids?
I do.
All right, cool. This makes this even easier. I did not know if you did or did not, and I know Jason does because I've met all his lovely kids. So, Jason, I'm going to start with you first.
Go for it.
If you had one piece of advice that you could leave your kids with, what would that piece of advice be?
Live every day like it's your last, and love your friends like you've never loved anybody in your life.
All right, Randy.
You know, we all get to make decisions in life, and some I've always tried to emphasize to the kids, some are more important than others. What you wear to school today isn't going to impact your life. Pick a dress, pick some shoes, and you'll get fine. But if you can get about half of the important decisions right, who you hang out with,
Huge part.
who you hang out with, where you go to school, who you marry. If you can get it 50% right, you'll do well in life. Don't dwell on making the right choice on shoes or the dress. Get the big decisions right, and that's what's important.
It's who you hang out with, right?
Yeah.
All right, now I'm going to give you a little more time to think about this. We're going to flip it, and I'll ask Randy the next question. That way you get a little time, so it's a little backwards this time.
Okay.
All right, so every show we end it with, one of the things we end with is give us your 2 cents. And give us your 2 cents can literally be anything. It could be something that's come to your mind during the show, something you just want to say, something you believe in, something you're passionate about. Every guest is given something almost completely different. So it's totally up to you what you give as your 2 cents.
I tell people to be adventurous in life. And I'm not saying from an adrenaline standpoint, don't go have to climb mountains, but don't be afraid to try something that you wouldn't have thought of doing. And I've done that so many times, and I've made so many good friends by just doing something, like going to Kentucky and buying a barrel of whiskey and stuff like that. I've made so many friends from that process. Just be a little adventurous. Don't stay in that closed cocoon. Get your paycheck in the mail every 2 weeks. Be adventurous. Take some chances in life.
I like that.
So
That's
I
solid.
totally agree with that. And the only thing I would add to that is like join Bourbon Club.
Join Bourbon Club.
Join Bourbon Club. It doesn't matter what bourbon club you join. Join Bourbon Club. You're going to be able to taste great things that you've never been able to try. You're going to be able to meet great people that you've never been able to meet before. To me, bourbon's all about the community, and that's what I really, really like about it. Is I've been able to meet people from every spectrum of life, and my favorite part is just hearing the fucking stupid like bourbon stories that we all have, you know. And I mean,
Yeah, it's a great part
that's
of
my
it.
favorite part is just the people.
Yeah.
and making Facebook friends into real friends.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot on this show. I mean, that's kind of how this podcast started, between the combination of sharing spirits with good, like-minded individuals and different people, or sharing a cigar. I mean, we have guests that, smoke cigars, don't smoke cigars, or they drink tequila or bourbon or whatever it is, it opens up a common lane of conversation, and it sets a lot of the bullshit in the real world aside.
Right.
And people can kind of let go of that for a little bit and just have a genuine conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's one of the things I found very valuable is, being involved in bourbon groups, being involved in cigar club, whether it's your racing club, your car club, whatever, just being more involved, putting yourself out there a little bit to meet new people, meet people that are different than you, that have different opinions than you, that you don't have to agree with and you can disagree with, but in a healthy way. And for whatever reason, the combination of spirits and cigars, usually where most people would think, like you had the alcohol and now, this issue is going to blow up and turn to something. Typically, it doesn't. Typically, it creates a commonality where you have something else to fall back on and you can agree to disagree. And it's like, you can move 100%. On down the road. So that's kind of the basis of the show. And I want to thank both of you for being on here today.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks.
Jason.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing Randy out, and Randy, thank you for making time on your trip up here to
Always
Dallas.
like to come up here and see my Dallas friends. So
yeah.
I lived in Dallas.
He's hard to find.
So.
Yeah, well, maybe you can get you a condo or something here and we can see you a little more up here and put that in Randy's
Just go down to
future out
Houston.
there.
I'll just stay with one
there.
of you guys. I'm good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to do before we sign off here is I do want to thank somebody else. Tim, I want to thank you and the Whiskey Blendery. Little advertising for you here.
Tim Hills is
got
fucking
you. Tim
badass.
Hills is a badass. His Whiskey Blendery is, look at Derek with the nice drop. Derek can be a guest in the show anytime he wants. Derek out there putting the product placement out there perfectly. Tim's a good friend of the shows.
I've heard about his business, and it sounds great.
When
sounds
you're
fun.
up here next time, you need to check it out. So what he does is he has his blendery. He buys sourced barrels, and he's created an environment in a building where you can have lockers if you'd like, where you can store your stuff. He's got his own personal collection on display. And then what he does, you think you know what you're doing with whiskey, come in and try some stuff. They've bought all these barrels, and they let you play this game of, can you create a good blend?
Right. No,
And you blend your own bottle. They bottle them. They give you a couple different bottle choices. Well, it was my brother-in-law's 40th birthday is coming up this week, and we threw him a surprise party this last Saturday. And I had the daunting task of getting him out of the house and keeping him occupied for several hours. Well, first they were like, take him to play golf. Well, I already knew whether he told his wife or not, we were playing golf on Friday, so how am I going to get him to play 2 days in a row? And I knew one of his clients was taking him out on Wednesday, so I was like, we got to come up with something. Well, Tim, graciously enough, invited all of us out to the blendery. We spent 4 hours with his team. They were absolutely awesome. Milo and Andy, they were great guys. They really were educational. A lot of these guys really didn't know a lot about bourbon. Like they liked bourbon, but they didn't know a lot. They really walked them from point A to point Z and told them everything they could have wanted to know and probably then some. And they got to make their own bottle. We got to have team battle of whose blend was better. We got to come up with a name for it. Then we got to bottle it, and we got to wax dip it. Some of these guys never got to be a part of a pick team or anything like that and do that. So excellent experience. And Tim, can't thank you enough. And we look forward to seeing you guys all next week, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Until then, we'll see you later.
All right. Thanks, Garrett.